If you like this video, please click on the like button. Comment with the names of the movies you would like us to cover next. Click the subscribe button and press the bell icon to get notified of our latest creations. We cover 100 movies from around the world every day. To advertise with our channel, reach out to us. Our contact information is on our channel page. Now, let's move to the plot of this movie.
Basil is a staid, somewhat buttoned-up, middle-class Greek-British writer raised in the UK. While at the Athens port of Piraeus waiting to catch a ferry to Crete, he meets a middle-aged peasant and musician named Zorba who carries only a zither in a case. In contrast to Basil's large quantity of luggage, including cases of books, Basil explains to Zorba that he is traveling to a Cretan village where he owns some land with the intention of reopening a lignite mine and perhaps curing his writer's block. Zorba has already related that he has experience as a miner and inveigles himself a position as Basil's foreman and factotum. Quote, "When they arrive at the Cretan village, they are greeted enthusiastically by the impoverished populace. They lodge initially with an elderly French former cabaret dancer named Madame Hortense in her self-styled Hotel Ritz. Hortense relates her a glamorous and exotic past as a courtesan among the competing Mediterranean powers, hinting that she was the lover of an Aetolian admiral called Cannavara, after whom she has named her pet parrot. Zorba tries to persuade Basil to enter into a relationship with Madame Hortense, but he is reluctant, so Zorba, with an eye on the main chance, seizes the opportunity, somewhat cynically exercising his considerable charm on the lonely woman. Single quote. Zorba admits to Basil that he has a checkered past, having been guilty of rape and murder as a soldier, his excuse being that they were only Bulgarians and Turks. He asserts that now, however, he rejects nationalism and bears no one any grudges. Over the next few days, Basil and Zorba attempt to work the old lignite mine, but it collapses and Zorba narrowly avoids injury. Zorba then has an idea to use the forest in the nearby mountains to source lumber to make new pit props to replace the rotten timbers of the mine. The land is owned by a monastery. Zorba tricks the monks into believing that a miracle has occurred, as part of a ploy to get him to give up the timber. Exultant, when he gets home, he breaks spontaneously into a dance, the so-called butcher's dance, or Sirtaki, in a scene which contrasts his exultant egotism with Basil's nervous inhibition. Quote, Zorba designs a system by which tree trunks can be sent down the mountain suspended from a wire. Single quote. Among the other residents is a young and attractive widowed woman who is resented and hated by the villagers for not remarrying. A young local boy, the son of one of the more important peasants, is madly in love with her, but she has spurned him repeatedly. One rainy afternoon, Basil offers her his umbrella, which she reluctantly takes. Zorba, who increasingly treats his boss as a pupil or nephew, knowingly suggests that she is attracted to him, but Basil, ever shy, refuses to pursue her. To get supplies to build the zip wire to bring the timbers down the mountain, Basil gives Zorba some money and sends him to the large port of Hania to buy cable and other supplies. But in Hania, Zorba gets drunk, visits at a cabaret, and spends money on presents and on drinking champagne with a cabaret dancer, hospitality girl with whom he spends the night. He also has his hair dyed as a symbol of his rediscovered youth and potency. In a letter to Basil, he details his exploits, angered by Zorba's irresponsibility and the squandering of his money. Basil untruthfully tells Madame Hortense, who is smitten with Zorba but feels abandoned, that Zorba intends to marry her upon his return. upon hearing which she is ecstatic. Meanwhile, the widow returns Basil's umbrella by way of Mimethos, the village idiot. Basil, after much agonizing, and untypically unshaven and perhaps drunk, goes to the widow's house. She lets him in, but then she sheds some tears. Embarrassed, he decides to leave, but she stops him and they spend the night together. However, their assignation has been observed by the jealous men of the village. When Zorba eventually returns with the supplies and gifts, he is surprised and angered to hear of Basil's lie to Madame Hortense. He also asks Basil about his whereabouts the night before. The brief encounter comes at a great cost. Word spreads of Basil's visit to the widow, and the men of the village, to make trouble, tell the youth who is in love with her, whereupon he drowns himself. When the widow attempts to attend the funeral, she is blocked from entering the church by the youth's father. The villagers blame her for the boy's suicide, though the clear implication is that she has been condemned for, on the one hand, being sexually active after the death of her husband, and on the other, rejecting the men of the village, personified by the boy. Some of the men of the village corral her outside the church and begin to stone her. Watched and encouraged by the villagers, Basil, unable to push through the crowd to intervene, sends Mimethos to fetch Zorba. Zorba arrives just as the villager who had maliciously informed the boy of Basil's tryst is about to kill the widow with his knife, with the explicit approval of the boy's father, who is watching on. Zorba overpowers the younger man and disarms him, but, thinking that the situation is under control, when he asks the widow to follow him and turns to go, the dead boy's father pulls his knife and cuts the widow's throat himself. The villagers close ranks around the father and his accomplices, shielding him as they all disperse, leaving only the outsiders Basil and Zorba and the idiot Mimethos, who is distraught. Basil laments his inability to intervene, and Zorba angrily laments the meaninglessness of the widow's death and of all deaths. Neither of them blame the villagers explicitly or remark on the barbarity of the widow's murder. The film cuts to a scene in which Basil, Zorba and the villagers construct the zip wire system for the timber, to the accompaniment of light-hearted music on the soundtrack. On a rainy day, Basil and Zorba come home and find Madame Hortense waiting. She expresses anger at Zorba for making no progress on the wedding. Zorba conjures up a story that he had ordered a white satin wedding dress, lined with pearls and adorned with real gold. Madame Hortense presents 2 golden rings she had made and proposes their immediate engagement. Zorba tries to stall, but eventually agrees with gusto. To Basil's surprise. Quote, some time later, Madame Hortense contracts pneumonia and is seen on her deathbed. Zorba stays by her side, along with Basil. Meanwhile, word spreads that the foreigner is dying, and since she has no heirs, the state will take her possessions and money. The poor villagers crowd around her hotel, impatiently waiting for her demise so they can steal her belongings. As 2 old ladies enter her room and gaze expectantly at her, other women try to enter, but Zorba manages to fight him off. At the instant of her death, the women re-enter Madame Hortense's bedroom en masse to steal her valued possessions. Zorba leaves with a sigh, as the hotel is ransacked and stripped bare by the shrieking and excited villagers. When Zorba returns to Madame Hortense's bedroom, the room is barren apart from her bed, where she lies, and the parrot in her cage. Zorba takes the birdcage with him. Single quote. Finally, Zorba's elaborate contraption to transport timber down the hill is complete. A festive ceremony is held, including lamb roasting on a spit and a barrel of wine, and all the villagers attend. After a blessing from the priests, Zorba signals by firing a rifle in the air and Log is sent hurtling down the zipline but at excessive speed, destroying the log itself and slightly damaging part of the contraption. Zorba pretends unconcern and gives orders for a second log to be sent down. This one also comes down too quickly and overshoots straight into the sea. By now the villagers and priests have grown fearful and head for cover. Zorba remains unfazed and signals for the third log, which accelerates with such violence that it destroys the entire contraption, creating havoc among the crowd. The villagers and monks flee in terror, leaving only Basil and Zorba amidst the wreckage. They sit by the shore to eat the roasted lamb and drink the wine alone. Zorba pretends to tell the future from a lamb bone, saying that he foresees a great journey to a big city. He asks Basil when he plans to leave, and Basil replies that he will go in a few days. Zorba tells Basil that the one thing Basil is missing is the element of madness, which enables a man to break free. The implication being free from circumstance, responsibility, care. They begins to laugh hysterically at the catastrophic outcome of their scheme and the effect on the villagers. Basil asks Zorba to teach him to dance, and the film ends with both men enthusiastically dancing the sirtaki on the deserted shore.